This story is titled, "Roommate Claims She Couldn't Afford Rent and Begged Me Not to Evict Her." Her TikTok account shows she's been subletting my room to strangers while I'm at work. I never thought I'd be standing in my own bedroom, staring at a stranger's belongings scattered across my furniture while my roommate was supposedly at work. The sight of unfamiliar suitcases, clothes, and personal items made my stomach turn. Just 2 months ago, Jessica, 25F, was crying in our living room, begging me, 27F, not to evict her because she couldn't afford the rent after losing her job. Now I knew where all that extra cash she suddenly had was coming from. She'd been renting out my room to complete strangers while I was working my 12-hour nursing shifts. Let me back up and explain how I ended up in this nightmare. I'm Amy, and I've been working as an ER nurse at Manhattan General for the past 3 years. The hours are brutal, but the pay is decent, and I managed to inherit a rent-controlled 2-bedroom apartment from my Aunt Linda, 62F, when she moved to Florida last year. It was a stroke of luck that helped me stay in the city despite the insane housing costs. Jessica moved in 6 months ago after responding to my roommate ad. She seemed perfect on paper, a marketing professional with stable income, clean habits, and similar interests. The first 4 months were great. We'd occasionally cook together, share stories about our day, and even started a Sunday brunch tradition. She was always punctual with rent and utilities, and we developed what I thought was a genuine friendship. Then came the layoffs at her company. I still remember that evening when she came home in tears, mascara running down her face, clutching her termination letter. My heart broke for her. I'd been through a similar situation during the pandemic and knew how devastating it could be. When she asked if she could stay despite being unable to pay the full rent for a couple of months while job hunting, I agreed. We worked out a payment plan where she'd pay what she could now and make up the difference once she found new employment. What I didn't know then was that Jessica's supposed job interviews and networking events were just a cover for something far more disturbing. I never would have discovered the truth if it weren't for my schedule getting switched last minute, bringing me home on a Tuesday afternoon when I was supposed to be working my usual night shift. But before I tell you about what I found when I opened my bedroom door that day, there's something else you should know about Jessica, something that makes this betrayal even more twisted. You see, 2 weeks before I discovered her scheme, she introduced me to her brother Marcus, 28M, who she claimed was going through a rough divorce. He started spending more time at our apartment, and I couldn't help but notice the way he'd look at me when he thought I wasn't paying attention. Jessica even hinted that he was interested in asking me out, and I'll admit, I was starting to feel a connection too. Now I wonder if that was just another part of her elaborate deception. Was Marcus even really her brother? Why did she want me to get close to him? The answers to these questions would soon reveal themselves in ways I never could have imagined, and they would make me question everything I thought I knew about trust, friendship, and the people we let into our lives. That Tuesday afternoon changed everything. I stood in my doorway, frozen, as a young woman, who I'd later learn was named Rachel, 24F, stared back at me with equal shock from where she sat cross-legged on my bed. She was wearing my favorite reading chair robe, the soft blue one my mom gave me last Christmas, and had transformed my personal space into what looked like her temporary home. The moment felt surreal, like one of those stress dreams I sometimes have after a particularly rough shift at the ER. But this was no dream. As Rachel scrambled to explain, my mind struggled to process the impossible story she was telling me. She'd found a room on TikTok, of all places, a great short-term rental in Manhattan with flexible check-in times. She showed me the listing on her phone, and there they were, videos of my bedroom, my personal space, being advertised by an account with 0 followers that posted nothing but room rental content. The username made my blood run cold, Manhattan Stays _Jessica. But it wasn't just the TikTok account that sent my world spinning. As Rachel continued explaining, she mentioned something that made my heart stop. She'd been directed to this arrangement by a really helpful guy named Marcus, who she'd met at a local coffee shop when she was desperately searching for short-term housing. Marcus, who had smoothly explained that his sister ran a legitimate room-sharing service for traveling nurses and medical professionals. Marcus, who I'd been developing feelings for, had been actively participating in this scheme the entire time. The pieces started falling into place. All those times Jessica insisted I text her my schedule in case of emergencies. The way she always seemed to know exactly when I'd be working my longest shifts. Even her sudden interest in learning about my hospital's rotation system made sense now. She wasn't being thoughtful or concerned. She was gathering intelligence for her operation. What hit me hardest wasn't just the violation of my privacy or the theft of my space. It was the realization that every moment of our friendship had been calculated. Those Sunday brunches where we shared our hopes and dreams? She was studying my patterns. The late-night conversations about her job search? Complete fabrications. Even her tears over losing her job were probably as fake as Marcus's identity as her brother. Speaking of Marcus, something Rachel said kept nagging at me. She mentioned he'd told her he ran similar arrangements in other properties around the city. How many other people were they scamming? And more importantly, who else's lives were they infiltrating with their fake stories and manufactured relationships? But the most chilling revelation was yet to come. As I helped Rachel gather her things, she was as much a victim in this as I was. She hesitated before leaving, clearly wrestling with whether to tell me something. What she finally shared made my blood turn to ice. Apparently, during one of her conversations with Marcus, he'd mentioned their next target, my Aunt Linda's beachfront condo in Florida. The same aunt who'd trusted me with her apartment, who'd helped me build my life in the city. They weren't just scamming me, they were planning to expand their operation to my family. I thought I was angry before, but now I was furious. And as I stood in my violated bedroom, surrounded by the evidence of their betrayal, I made a decision. Jessica and Marcus had no idea I'd discovered their scheme yet. They thought they still had me fooled with their elaborate web of lies. Little did they know, their carefully constructed house of cards was about to come crashing down, and I knew exactly how to make it happen. After Rachel left, I spent hours documenting everything in my room. Every misplaced item, every sign of stranger occupation, all carefully photographed on my phone. But the real goldmine was Jessica's TikTok account. I screen recorded every video, every description, every comment interaction. My hands were shaking with anger, but years of handling emergency room crises had taught me to channel emotional turmoil into methodical action. That's when I noticed something strange in one of Jessica's videos. In the background of my room, reflected in my dresser mirror, was a familiar face, Melissa, 26F, my coworker from the ER. The timestamp showed this was from 2 weeks ago, during my overnight shift. My mind raced back to that morning when Melissa had been oddly quiet during handover, avoiding eye contact. Now I understood why. She'd unknowingly rented my room from Jessica, probably never realizing it belonged to her colleague. The sick feeling in my stomach grew worse. How many of my coworkers had unknowingly slept in my bed? Had Jessica specifically targeted the hospital staff? The thought made me nauseous, but it also gave me an idea. You see, Melissa wasn't just any coworker, she was our charge nurse, responsible for shift scheduling. If Jessica was using my work schedule to coordinate her rentals, then maybe it was time for my schedule to become a little less predictable. I reached out to Melissa, and the conversation was awkward at first. She was mortified when I showed her Jessica's TikTok account, recognizing herself in the mirror's reflection. But her embarrassment quickly turned to anger when she realized she'd been part of a scam targeting hospital staff. As charge nurse, she had access to not just my schedule, but everyone's. A quick check revealed multiple staff members had fallen victim to Jessica's short-term housing solution. What happened next was entirely Melissa's idea. She wouldn't just help me modify my schedule, she would create a completely fake rotation. On paper, I would be working my usual long shifts, but in reality, I'd be free to catch Jessica in the act. The plan was simple, but timing would be crucial. Meanwhile, Marcus kept up his performance, texting me sweet messages and asking about my upcoming shifts. Each word felt like a knife twist now that I knew the truth. But I played along, even agreeing to a dinner date he proposed for the following week. My skin crawled every time I responded to his texts, but I needed him to believe nothing had changed. But Jessica wasn't as smooth as she thought. In her rush to clean up evidence of her latest guest, after my unexpected return, she'd left something behind, a small notebook wedged between my mattress and headboard. Inside were dates, names, and payment records, but more importantly, there were notes about other apartments around the city. My blood ran cold when I saw my Aunt Linda's Florida address listed with a star next to it, along with what appeared to be her work schedule at her new job. They'd already begun surveillance on their next target. What they didn't know was that while they were planning their next move, I was several steps ahead. Jessica had gotten sloppy, probably too confident in her ability to manipulate me. She'd left a digital trail that would prove to be her undoing, and the fake work schedule was about to throw her entire operation into chaos. But the biggest shock was still to come. Something hidden in that notebook that would reveal this scam went far beyond just subletting rooms. As I flipped through those pages, a familiar name caught my eye, someone I hadn't thought about in months. Suddenly, the puzzle pieces shifted, revealing a picture far more personal and vindictive than I could have imagined. This wasn't just about money, this was about revenge. And I was beginning to understand why I had been chosen as their target. The name in the notebook hit me like a physical blow, Katie Morrison. 1 year ago, she was my patient in the ER after a severe car accident. I remembered her case vividly. How could I not? It was one of those nights that haunts every healthcare worker, when despite doing everything right, things still go wrong. Katie didn't make it, and her case had gone through extensive review. The hospital's investigation had cleared our entire team. The injuries were simply too severe. But there, in Jessica's messy handwriting, was Katie's name with a single note beside it, Sister. My mind raced back to all those conversations with Jessica about our families. Not once had she mentioned a sister, let alone one who had passed away. The realization made me feel sick. Jessica wasn't some random scammer who had answered my roommate ad. She had chosen me specifically, and Marcus wasn't her brother at all. They were Katie's siblings, and they blamed me for their sister's death. The next pages of the notebook revealed months of planning. They tracked down everyone involved in Katie's case, but I had been their primary target. Jessica had orchestrated everything, from responding to my roommate ad to creating situations that would make me sympathetic to her supposed financial troubles. Even Marcus's careful romantic pursuit was part of their revenge plan. They wanted more than money. They wanted to destroy my life the way they felt I had destroyed theirs. My hand shook as I read their plans for my Aunt Linda's Florida condo. It wasn't just about expanding their scam. They discovered Linda was a character witness in Katie's hospital review. In their minds, she had helped cover up their sister's wrongful death. The rental scam was just phase one. They planned to systematically dismantle every support system I had. That night, as I processed everything, my phone buzzed with a text from Marcus. He was checking if we were still on for our dinner date tomorrow night. The same night, Jessica had 3 different bookings scheduled for my room, according to her notebook. Their overconfidence was their weakness. They never imagined I would discover the truth, let alone find their detailed plans. I thought about Katie, about that terrible night in the ER. I remembered holding her hand as we waited for the surgical team, how she had asked me to call her family. I was the one who had made those calls, who had spoken to her siblings. Looking back now, I could see Jessica and Marcus in the waiting room, their faces blurred by grief and shock. They had watched me walk away after delivering the news, probably noting my name tag, marking me as the face of their loss. But as I stared at their elaborate revenge scheme laid out in black and white, something else caught my eye. Mixed in with the rental records were medical documents, copies of Katie's charts, examination notes, and, wait, these weren't just copies. Some of these documents weren't in the official hospital records. My heart started racing as I realized what I was looking at. In their quest for revenge, Jessica and Marcus had unknowingly discovered something that changed everything about that night. I reached for my phone to call Melissa. The fake schedule we'd created was about to become more important than ever, but not for the reasons we'd originally planned. What I'd found in those documents would not only expose Jessica and Marcus's revenge scheme, but would also finally reveal the true story of what happened to Katie Morrison. And tomorrow night's dinner date with Marcus? It was going to happen, but not in the way he expected. Sometimes the best way to dismantle a revenge plot is to let it play out, just not in the way your enemies anticipated. As I formulated my plan, I couldn't help but wonder, how do you tell someone that their quest for revenge has been built on a lie? And more importantly, what do you do when the truth is even more devastating than the fiction they believed? The restaurant Marcus chose for our date was ironically the same one where Katie used to work before her accident. Another calculated detail in their revenge plot, designed to twist the knife without me knowing. But as I walked in and saw him waiting at the table, his practiced smile couldn't hide the slight tremor in his hands. He was nervous, but not for the reasons he should have been. I'd spent the afternoon with Melissa, reviewing everything we'd discovered. The medical documents in Jessica's notebook weren't just random copies. They were originals from a private clinic, dated 3 weeks before Katie's fatal accident. They showed she had been diagnosed with a rare heart condition, one that could cause sudden blackouts. Katie had been warned not to drive, but she'd kept this diagnosis from her family. The clinic had tried to contact her for follow-up appointments, but she never responded. This changed everything about the night of the accident. The severe trauma wasn't just from the impact. Katie had likely lost consciousness while driving, which explained why there were no brake marks at the scene. Her siblings had spent a year believing the ER team had failed her, never knowing their sister had been battling her own private medical crisis. The weight of this knowledge sat heavy in my chest as Marcus pulled out my chair. He had no idea that at this exact moment, Jessica was probably discovering her carefully orchestrated rental schedule had fallen apart. My work schedule showed I'd be on a 16-hour shift, but instead, Melissa and hospital security were documenting Jessica's attempts to let strangers into my room. As Marcus launched into another one of his carefully scripted stories about growing up with Jessica, I pulled out Katie's medical file and placed it on the table. The change in his expression was instant: confusion, then recognition, then something close to fear. His hands froze mid-gesture as I explained what we'd found. The next 30 minutes were intense. Marcus listened in stunned silence as I walked him through everything: Katie's diagnosis, her decision to keep driving, the true cause of the accident. Years of working in the ER had taught me how to deliver life-changing news, but this was different. I wasn't just changing his understanding of his sister's death. I was dismantling the foundation of a year-long revenge plot. But then Marcus said something that made my blood run cold. Jessica wasn't just letting strangers into my room. She was photographing and documenting everything in my personal life. Every piece of mail, every medical document, every private photo. Their plan wasn't just about subletting my room or scamming my aunt's condo. They were building a case, preparing to submit a formal complaint against my medical license, planning to destroy my career the way they thought I had failed their sister. My phone buzzed with text from Melissa. Jessica had just been caught trying to let another guest into my room, but something was wrong. The notebook we'd found wasn't her only record. There was another set of plans we hadn't discovered yet. And based on what security had just found in Jessica's bag, tomorrow wasn't just another day in their revenge scheme. It was supposed to be the end game. As I looked at Marcus across the table, I realized this dinner wasn't going to end the way either of us had planned. The truth about Katie had changed everything, but there was still one more shocking revelation to come. Because what Marcus didn't know, what even Jessica hadn't discovered in all her snooping, was that I had my own connection to Katie Morrison. One that would make their entire revenge plot collapse like a house of cards. Marcus stared at the photo I pulled from my wallet, a faded picture of two young girls at summer camp, arms around each other's shoulders, matching friendship bracelets on their wrists. One was me at 13. The other was Katie. His hands trembled as he took the photo, recognition dawning in his eyes. Katie had attended that camp the summer their parents divorced, the summer she stopped talking about her childhood. I'd recognized her the moment they brought her into the ER that night, but in the chaos of trying to save her life, there hadn't been time to process the connection. Later, during the investigation, I'd kept quiet about knowing her as a child. How could I explain that the nurse they were investigating had once been their sister's best friend? That we'd lost touch after camp when her family moved away, and I'd spent years wondering what had happened to her? The irony was crushing. Jessica and Marcus had spent months infiltrating my life, never realizing I was the same Amy their sister used to write about in her childhood diary. The diary Jessica had quoted from in her notebook, planning to use Katie's old writings about wanting to be a nurse to somehow prove I'd failed her intentionally. While Marcus struggled to process this revelation, my phone lit up with urgent messages from Melissa. Security had found something disturbing in Jessica's bag: printouts of my entire work history, documentation of every patient I'd lost in the ER, and a USB drive containing what looked like forged medical records. She'd planned to submit everything to the medical board tomorrow, timing it with an anonymous tip to local news stations about a negligent nurse who'd caused multiple deaths. The scale of their planned destruction hit Marcus hard. He'd known about the room rentals, had participated in gathering information, but Jessica had hidden the darker aspects of her endgame from him. Tears rolled down his face as he read through Katie's medical records again, finally understanding that their entire crusade had been built on a foundation of misplaced grief and hidden truths. That's when Jessica herself burst into the restaurant, her face pale with panic. She discovered her rental scheme had been exposed and had rushed to warn Marcus, only to find us sitting together with Katie's medical files spread across the table. The look of betrayal on her face quickly morphed into something darker when she saw the camp photos still in Marcus's hands. What followed was one of the most intense hours of my life. 3 people bound by grief, secrets, and a decade-old summer friendship, finally confronting the truth. Jessica broke down when Marcus showed her the clinic records, her carefully constructed revenge fantasy crumbling in the face of evidence that Katie's death hadn't been anyone's fault but chance and her own secret struggle. In the end, it wasn't the exposure of their rental scam or the threat of legal consequences that stopped Jessica and Marcus. It was Katie's own words. I'd kept all her letters from after camp, including one where she wrote about wanting to become a nurse because of how I'd helped her through her parents' divorce that summer. The sister they thought they were avenging would have been horrified by what they'd done in her name. The aftermath was complicated. Jessica and Marcus agreed to make restitution to everyone they'd scammed, including my coworkers. They also handed over all the documentation they'd gathered for their revenge plot, dismantling months of calculated destruction in a single night. In return, I shared every memory I had of Katie from that summer, filling in a piece of their sister's life they'd never known about. Melissa helped me file a police report about the subletting scheme, but in the end, I decided not to press charges. Sometimes understanding the truth is punishment enough. Jessica moved out the next day, leaving behind a letter of apology in Katie's diary. She thought I should have it, writing that Katie would have wanted her childhood friend to keep her memories safe. Now, months later, I sometimes look through that diary, reading about the sweet, brave girl I knew at camp who grew up to face her own battles silently. I think about how grief can twist people, turning loved ones into avenging angels who lose sight of what their lost ones would have actually wanted. And I realize that sometimes the best revenge against hatred is simply revealing the truth, even when that truth hurts more than the lies we tell ourselves. My Aunt Linda's condo remains safe, my career intact, and my room is once again my own private space. But I keep that camp photo on my dresser now, next to Katie's diary. They serve as reminders that life's deepest wounds and greatest healings often come from the same source: the complicated, messy, beautiful connections we share with others, even those we've lost along the way.